Bonjour à tous et toutes, je suis Ursula Gobert du Conseil de recherche en sciences humaines et me fait un grand plaisir d'être avec vous ce matin et surtout de présenter la prochaine panel. My title is Associate VP at SSHRC, Future Challenges, so it's very apropos and thank you to Canada 2020 for giving me this opportunity to introduce the panel on jobs, skills, and the future of work. So maybe to save some time, as I'm just doing some brief intro notes, we can invite the panel to come up and have a seat. So we heard yesterday the important themes of embracing diversity and creativity and collaboration. And at SSHRC, these are truly the values that we embody. And it's also our clear mandate because we are entrusted with supporting the very best talent and ideas at post-secondary institutions, colleges and universities, and their partners across the country. That is our mandate, that is our purpose. But we also recognize that there is work to do to leverage that support, those investments to our future generations, to the innovation agenda particularly. And so how do we recognize the value that the students and the ideas and the collaborative efforts and their ambitions and pursuits, how do we recognize that value and how do we act upon connecting that value to the policies, to the strategies, to the business decisions that are made across all your sectors? And that's really why we're so very, very pleased to be supporting the efforts of Canada 2020 and all of you in that very important agenda. So I will turn to introducing our panel this morning, which will be moderated by Chris Smillie of Canada's Building Trades Union. And he will be joined by Jennifer Flanagan, who many of us know well, CEO of Actua, Melissa Sariffodeen, co-founder and CEO of Ladies Learning Code, Toby Hamilton from the Institute of Quantum Computing at the University of Waterloo, and Onuoha, Vice President, Global Government Affairs at Xerox. Please join me in welcoming our panel.
I think the minister left her binder here. I'll take good care of it. Good morning, delegates, special guests, and Canada 2020 regulars. On behalf of the Advisory Board of Canada 2020, I want to thank Minister Chagger just quickly, even though she's left, for taking the time to address us this morning. The work of a small business and tourism minister is one of the most critical, although often underappreciated portfolios. The major challenges small businesses face are the same challenges Canada faces every day: people challenges. Survey business, large or small, near or far, their primary obsession and primary business risk is not global trade, access to capital, or GDP growth. It's about getting the people thing right, getting the skills and people they need to do business. This transitions nicely to the topic of the panel this morning: jobs, skills, and the future of work. This is a large topic, thanks Tim, and we have 40 minutes or so. 5 minutes, oh good. Today we've assembled some leading thinkers to give you a bit of a teaser on an issue that I envision as a potential future standalone 2020 conference. This really is a body of policy work Canada needs to get right for the sake of our country. Canada is largely a traditional resource, manufacturing, construction, and healthcare service-based economy. About 4 million Canadians are involved in the goods-producing sector, and about 14 million in the service-producing sectors. In the goods-producing sector, employment in construction and manufacturing make up 80% of the jobs. In the service-producing sectors, the top 3 industries by employees are wholesale and retail trade, healthcare and social assistance, professional, scientific, and technical. Canada has a workforce made up of 15 million employees and almost 3 million self-employed people. For reference purposes, the United States has 15 million self-employed workers from a total workforce of about 160 million. It appears that Canada has a higher percentage number of self-starters than the US. Maybe we're more entrepreneurial than we give ourselves credit for. So how healthy is our labor market? Canada is still experiencing significant challenges in unemployment. The national figure has been fairly stable and pesky in the 7 to 7.5% range since 2011, and last week's economic update predicts it will hover around 6.5% in the next 5 years. That means, on average, about 1 million of us are out of work at any given time. Not terrible, but certainly not wonderful. These numbers can be deceptive. Specific demographics have much higher unemployment rates, 13% amongst youth and sometimes similar or worse amongst Indigenous people. Canada does have a number of regional economies which experience independent employment conditions and variables. The labor market is not homogeneous in how it reacts to economic conditions. The look and feel of the workforce is changing. Our country is getting older. Some demographic and workforce groups are on the verge of mass retirements in the next 5 to 9 years. In construction, for instance, more than 250,000 skilled tradespeople are retiring forever, leaving industry scrambling to meet demand. The transportation sector will also witness a mass exodus, as well as healthcare. So, is the nature of work going to change substantially in the future of Canada? The obvious question is, how can our K-12 and post-secondary education and industrial training systems better prepare young Canadians for the future of work in Canada? What does that actually look like? Are we suffering from a lack of proper workforce planning a decade ago? And if so, can we correct our course? To what extent do we need to both prepare our population base for the jobs of the traditional economy as well as the new economy? Do we run the risk of creating a workforce bubble that is underprepared for the jobs that need doing today as we look forward to the jobs of the future? Does the skills mismatch problem persist in our country? People without jobs and jobs without people, as the previous finance minister of Canada coined. So, onto the panel. They're looking at me like they want to get involved. Hurry up, Chris. We have some experts here today to give their practical vision of the workforce of tomorrow and innovation and skills training. Jennifer Flanagan is the co-founder, president, and CEO of Actua. Actua is the national charity and Canada's largest science and technology outreach organization, working to build STEM and coding skills in youth across Canada. Under Jennifer's leadership, Actua has led a 2-decade-long commitment to inclusivity through programs for Indigenous youth, girls, and new Canadians. Someone else said MA's last name, so I'll just say MA. MA is Vice President, Global Government Affairs at Xerox Corporation. He's responsible for national and subnational government affairs strategy and related public policy legislative engagement in Canada. Prior to joining Xerox, he held several senior positions within the Government of Canada, including Director of Operations at the Privy Council Office. Another one with a tough last name, Melissa, co-founder and CEO, Ladies Learning Code. Melissa's a social entrepreneur, leader, and big thinker. As co-founder and CEO of Ladies Learning Code and Canada Learning Code, Melissa established a reputation as a fierce advocate for women and youth. She's dedicated to ensuring that they have the critical skills, confidence, and opportunities they need to become passionate builders, not just consumers of technology. To date, the organization has taught over 50,000 Canadians code through their programs, which are offered in 29 cities across Canada. Lastly, but certainly not least, is Tobi-Day Hamilton. This is a long title. Director, Communications and Strategic Initiatives, Institute for the Quantum Computing at the University of Waterloo. Tobi has spent her career promoting technology and technology careers. She currently leads the outreach and communications activities at the Institute for Quantum Computing at the University of Waterloo. Research at IQC harnesses the quantum world for the creation of transformative technologies and the development of a quantum industry for Canada. In terms of format, I've asked each panelist to frame their thoughts in 5 or 6 minutes of initial remarks, after which we'll engage in what I hope will be an enlightening conversation on the future of Canada's workforce. I know there's some doozy questions out there because I'm usually in the crowd asking them, so I fully expect some tough questions. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here among you and to be on this panel of people that I get a lot of inspiration from. So I'm going to start with a really quick story. And I think the story illustrates how Actua is playing in this whole space of skill development and contributing to innovation. So a couple of years ago, we partnered with Google to significantly increase the coding and digital skills programming that we're doing with youth across the country. And part of that is to really get that programming into the hands of Indigenous youth and youth across the North. So we set out to deliver coding camps across the Arctic. And as you can imagine, for those of you who've been there or just thinking about that, what the challenges would be in terms of equipment and connectivity and just context, and that the kids there are not in the same context or having the same experience as kids in more urban centers. So we headed up and wanted to, as always, deliver content that would connect to the lives of kids, that would connect the skills that we're trying to build to show them why they matter. And so we have an amazing content team at Actua, and they took one of the activities that we do, which is code-created music. So kids love music, they love, making their own music. So we pivoted that a little bit and actually incorporated sounds of the North. So we got kids to go out and capture northern sounds. So they, walking on snow, the sounds of Inuktitut being spoken, throat singing was incredible, them capturing their throat songs. And they were actually able to recombine that. So they learned the software, they got comfortable with the tech, and they coded their own music. And the reason that was so profound is that it actually connected the skills that we were working to build with their culture, with what mattered to them. They could actually see how this could, technology and knowing technology and having those skills could actually help them propel some of the things that they cared about. So sharing that, they then shared it with their families. They were able to share that with the world. And that example really illustrates the way that we need to provide experiential learning opportunities to youth so that they can make those connections to future opportunities. I get asked all the time if our youth across the country are being prepared to be our future innovators. And I'm a super optimist, but the answer to that question is no. They are not being prepared in the way that we need them to be prepared. And the good news is that I think that this generation coming up is the most driven and primed to be the best innovators we've ever seen. So as Dave Waters said yesterday in describing innovation as doing the right things better, youth across this country absolutely want to do the right things better. They want to combine technology with other interests. They want to change the world. They want to make a difference. We use a youth advisory council. Actua has a national youth advisory council of kids aged 14 to 19 who we tap into to give us advice and to help us keep our finger on the pulse. And these are kids that have ideas of how they want to use technology to change the world that would literally knock your socks off. But in the next breath, they will tell us that they do not have the kinds of opportunities that they need to exercise those ideas. So just like yesterday when Chris Hadfield and Mike Moffat talked about the fact that we're really good at seeing and thinking and not acting, or we're good at the ideas part and not the implementation part, well, youth across the country are telling us that they need those opportunities earlier to implement and to act. And so these kids are telling us that because there's a huge focus on marks and high achievement in terms of grades, that precludes them or supersedes any ability that they have to take risks or to experiment with failure, because they're not going to do anything that could potentially harm that grade standing. And that's especially important when you look at kids who are disadvantaged or coming from a lower socioeconomic background and depend on financial aid going into universities. This is, and I'm so happy that the morning started on diversity, and I think we'll all talk about diversity, but Actua focuses on engaging the hardest to reach youth in the country. So we know that women are underrepresented, and we've been working on that for 2 decades, but we're also struggling with engaging kids in rural, remote communities, kids facing socioeconomic challenges, and Indigenous youth, our fastest growing youth population. And these kids are the single best solution that we have to filling the long-term needs we have in the workforce. Single best solution. Not only that, but their diverse perspectives are absolutely essential for us to achieve our innovation potential. We have to do it better for those kids. So my key message is to break down innovation, to make it more accessible and practical so that people connect to it and understand. The best way to build an innovation culture is by starting with youth across the country. And we need to give them those experiences to implement and act early on. So I think one of my favorite analogies is to talk about sports. Like, we do not train athletes in this country to sit in a classroom for 12 years and learn the theory of sport. And then when they get into the university years, they get to dabble in it a little bit, but they really don't get to play with it until after that period. So there is no way that that's how we should be preparing youth with the skills that we need for them to be future innovators. They need to have experiential learning opportunities to play with this stuff, to act, to fail, to learn, and do that very, very early on.
Just building on that, one of the key issues, I'm reminded a colleague of mine mentioned the other day, and this individual prior to this comment was a former friend of mine, mentioned that, you Canadians, Canada is the land of polite political platitudes and glorified mediocrity. So my former friend, I should mention as well, this former friend is also a Donald Trump supporter. So I think you should take that comment with a grain of salt. But with respect to innovation and the future of work, one of the privileges that I have is working for a multinational technology company that actually sees Canada as a platform for innovation. We believe that Canada actually creates value through innovation. We operate in 186 countries around the world, $18 billion corporation, and Canada is one of the single most prolific innovation platforms for our company. We are the only multinational corporation in our traditional competitive space conducting value-added advanced materials research here in Canada under a global mandate. And we have roughly about 100 individuals working at our research center, the Xerox Research Center of Canada, which is located in Mississauga. And that one particular platform generates well in excess of 160 patentable ideas every year. So that's 3 inventions a week. I don't know how many great ideas you had last week. I did not have 3, but our researchers at the XRCC probably did. Now, what's significant about that, just to put it in its proper perspective, one of the more iconic knowledge platforms in the world is the Fraunhofer Institute. And the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany constitutes an employee base of 24,000 individuals. It produces or files for roughly 670 patents every year. And it has an operating budget of roughly 2 billion euro. And so when we talk about productivity and the enormity of resources allocated towards things like commercialization and research, and you look at what's happening here in Canada, our platform here in Canada is the single most prolific knowledge platform out of all of the 5 global research centers that we have in the world. And the material science and surface chemistry that goes on at our research center is considered to be best in class, not just in Canada, not just in North America, but in the world. It's interesting to note that in addition to our 90 inventors and roughly 25 technicians and scientists supporting both research operations, pilot plant operations, and supply development capable of manufacturing scale production of specialty materials, each year we hire 42 co-op students from some of Canada's research-intensive universities right across the country. And these co-op students aren't asked to make coffee and make photocopies, although there's nothing wrong with doing that. These individuals are allowed to work side by side with some of the world's most renowned principal scientists in surface chemistry, photonics, spectroscopy, and an interesting story that I've told before is about, our company was doing some work for a famous smartphone producer and trying to optimize the next generation of organic light-emitting diode screen technology. And some of the most valuable IP was created here in Canada at the Xerox Research Center of Canada. 2 of the names on the most compelling patents associated with a multi-million-dollar license that we sold to this company were co-op students, Canadian co-op students that were recruited from 2 of our research-intensive universities here. So as Jennifer was mentioning, experience-based learning is a compelling element to stimulating the future pipeline of knowledge work and to preserving technological value, not in terms of the technology, but in terms of the capacity to generate the technology, the capacity to take ideas from the human mind into the market. Innovation is the difference between thought leadership and market leadership, and that is driven by an intense experience-based interaction between those who are practicing the art and science of, in our case, research, development, and engineering, and those who are aspiring to it as well. I think one of the best descriptions of innovation and the medium or the platforms we need to create to incubate innovation came from the famous comedian John Cleese. I don't know how many Monty Python fans there are out there, but John Cleese, who was one of the members of the Monty Python group, was also a very effective management consultant. And he did some research on innovation. What are the critical success factors associated with growing and incubating an innovative workforce? And his conclusion, with which I agree, is that you need to create an enlightened state of play, which implicates open innovation, inclusion, collaboration, all of these skills which have less to do with technology and the hard and fast rules associated with instrumentalism and more to do with the humanity that drives us to achieve more, to move forward. So in that regard, I would say, I would conclude the remarks by saying that this is the art and science of creating a state of enlightened play is critical to our long-term success and the resilience of our workforce. We look for 3 key agilities when we're hiring people. We look for change agility, we look for people agility, and we look for results agility. And those types of agilities are what we need to focus in on going forward. Chris mentioned a number of StatsCan data associated with the workforce. If you looked at some of the stats that he didn't mention are actually quite instructive as well. When you look at the National Household Survey, and you look at the portrait of the Canadian, the employment landscape in Canada, there are some significant risks that are in place for the Canadian workforce associated with things like automation, which is presenting disruptive change, technological and innovation change to Canada. So when you look at the statistics, for women in Canada, if you look again at the NHS survey data and the portrait of the Canadian employment landscape, you'll see that amongst women, the single most, the highest employment levels by occupation exist for women in retail sales. The second highest occupation is actually the occupational category of administrative assistant. For men, the number 1 occupation is, and for women, it's roughly 3.3% of women in retail, and roughly 4.7% of women in retail, and roughly 3.7 in the administrative assistant category. For men, it's 3.3% of men working in Canada are occupied by sales as well, and the number 2 category is transport truck drivers. So consider what's going to happen in this country without an adequate labor force and labor market adjustment strategy that is informed by enlightened innovation. If automation, which targets occupations that can easily be replicated, such as retail sales, and in the era of driverless cars, large-scale cargo transport. These are some of the most highly engaged occupational areas in Canada. We need to continue to create value through innovation, which means change agility, people agility, results agility, and creating a context for collaborative open innovation. And I'm here to say that Canada not only can do that, Canada does do that, and our research platform is evidence of that.
Thank you.
I think you saw my notes, because one of the things I was going to say, I mean, you look to the workforce and automation, it's very small percent of our jobs will actually be removed entirely by automation. But a large percent, and I think Brookfield Institute cites 42% roughly, will be largely transformed by automation. And so Uber carting beer, autonomously is just an example of that. And so the work that we do at Ladies Learning Code is really about, equipping youth is a huge part of it, but women and people now with these skills. So when we started just over 5 years ago, we launched a workshop in Toronto, sold out in 7 minutes for adult women. We launched another the month after, sold out in 30 seconds. So what that means is it was harder to get a workshop at Ladies Learning Code than a ticket to a Beyonce concert, which I think underscores this huge need for adult women to learn these skills as well. They're coming to us from they're journalists, they're marketing professionals, they're surgeons, they're, individuals from all industries who are recognizing that they don't have the skills that they need right now to participate in their current jobs and the direction that their jobs are moving. And so that's really the work that we do among, work with educators, with youth. I think there's so many factors at play to engage, Canadians in the types of learning experiences that they need for now and importantly into the future. And so we run anything from a one-day workshop where you learn to build a website, to summer camp, to in a 7-week program, learning to code. And again, the whole idea for us is how can we make this so practical, so relevant for what you need to do? How do you leave with the skills that you can actually use right away, so that you can get that promotion, you can take on that work, so you don't have to wait 6 weeks for your developer to get back to you. You can actually ship and make changes right away. And again, the whole goal here is really that we're providing immediate skills that can be used, and we see that every day in our learners. We have women. Catherine was a lawyer working on Bay Street, and she left her job just recently to build websites to manage her and her husband's network of restaurants. And we have other learners in our community who came to us years ago when we first started, knew nothing. They're music teachers or philosophy majors, and they were without jobs, and they've come to us and they've learned to code in a short period of time. We're talking like as short as 9 weeks, and they're moving into careers as developers. They're moving back to their industry, taking on additional work and really transforming their lives. And then these individuals are coming back and actually teaching our youth. They're teaching other women. And so there's a cycle of kind of transformation where they're, closing the loop on their learning, and they're, the magnitude of their impact is only growing. And so I think youth is an important part of equipping the next generation, but I think we'd be, missed to forget that, automation is moving quickly. And if we don't start equipping Canadians right now, adults, men, women, then we're really gonna miss out, because work is transforming right under our nose. So,
Thanks, Melissa. Yesterday we heard Colonel Hadfield talk about how, as humans, we've harnessed steam, we've harnessed fire, we harnessed electromagnetism for technological revolution. We are currently in the cusp of the next great technological revolution. The researchers at the Institute for Quantum Computing are harnessing the quantum laws of nature for the next great technological revolution. We're looking at creating technologies that will really transform how we live, work, and play every day. And it's a great honor for me to be here and talk about this today, because people look at quantum and they say, oh, that's too hard, I don't understand, it's too hard for me. But as Canadians, we are leading the world in quantum research. From UBC to Sherbrooke to the University of Toronto to the University of Waterloo, we have some of the greatest researchers here in Canada. And we, at the Institute for Quantum Computing, we're amongst the top 4 in the world. We compete for talent from the US, Harvard, MIT, Caltech, Singapore, all around the world. We're competing for talent to come to Canada. And that's an unusual opportunity for Canada, and we need to harness that opportunity. We need to make sure we have the right immigration policies, the right environment, the right cultural opportunities for people to want to come and work here in Canada. Luckily, at the University of Waterloo and in Waterloo region, we have a fantastic ecosystem, right from the Perimeter Institute that looks at theoretical physics to IQC, which is bridging that theoretical to experimental, and working into commercialization, and the broader ecosystem within Waterloo Region, harnessing those entrepreneurial skills, those great students that come to Waterloo and want to start companies and want to create new jobs for Canadians and new jobs for immigrants, and a new revolution for Canada. And we need to make sure that everyone has the skills that Actua and Ladies Learning Code, and people are curious about the world, curious about how it works, so that we can give them the opportunities, we can take the opportunity to lead the world in quantum technologies and really shine as Canadians. And it makes me very proud to say that that's happening here. And I'll give you one example, and Jennifer will laugh when I pull this out because she's seen me do this before. We grow diamonds in our labs in Waterloo. Yep, we actually grow diamonds. And I have one here, and you can look at this later on. But this is just one example of some of the technologies we're looking at. This will be a quantum sensor. We build this atom by atom. It's a nitrogen vacancy diamond. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to get into what that is. But one day, we'll be able to coat this in a protein. You'll be able to swallow it. We'll be able to scan you without ever, touching you at all, and we'll be able to tell whether you have cancer at a very early level. Imagine what we can do with that. And that's just one of the things that we're looking at. We're looking at quantum computing that will break all the codes that exist in the world today. That's kind of scary, but it also gives us more computing power than we can even imagine. Some of the greatest challenges we have in healthcare is how do we decode a protein that doesn't fold properly? We don't have the computing power to understand how that works. With a quantum computer, we'll have that computing power. We'll also be able to create unbreakable codes so that we'll be secure. We'll create sensors like this so that we can live better lives, we can live longer lives. It's those kinds of opportunities that we need people who are ready to take on those challenges, who are curious about their world, who understand science and technology and are passionate about that to create the next generation. Back to you, Chris.
So thank you very much, all of you, for your unique perspective. I want to reframe and come back to some of the opening remarks I had, and then have a quick discussion, and then I want to go to the audience. We have 16 or so minutes left. Today there was an opinion piece in the Globe and Mail by Stephen Krein where he talks about talent is global today and Canada needs to adapt. He lists the most in-demand occupations for Canada as engineers and skilled trades. So he quotes the last government's numbers, which say by 2020 there's going to be 2 million people short in our economy. His argument or his solution to the problem is largely focused on immigration, temporary immigration or full-time permanent immigration. So what do we do in Canada about the training system? Is immigration the only way to move forward, or is this really about K-12? Is this really about post-secondary? Is this really about getting those kinds of things right for Canadians? Or is it all about immigration? We saw the finance minister's update. He had a global skills strategy. I'm waiting for the Canadian skills strategy addendum to that remark, to that paper. And so let's have that conversation. I mean, we can frame those remarks for the finance minister and send them in after we're done. So I'm interested on your thoughts on that, and then we can move forward to the audience. Crickets, no crickets.
No. We're being considerate. I mean, there's certainly, I think it's not an either or at all. I think it's a both, and there's a very short-term, quick need to increase our workers, and immigration policies are vital to that. But we have to look in a longer-term way, and it's not that long-term. I talk about our work all the time saying, oh, well, I know it's a long-term view. It's actually not that long. It's in the next decade that these youth are going to be coming in and filling these jobs. And we're, I say it all the time, we're leaving out giant portions of our population from being able to fill those skills. It's the most efficient, it makes the most sense, it has the most social implications. The opportunity cost of not engaging youth and building the skills out for them to fully participate is huge. So there's an economic argument to this for sure on the workforce side, but the social argument's huge.
So quickly describe that to me then with your Aboriginal outreach. You have that section of your business where you go and reach Aboriginal populations. Talk to us about the process and the outcomes, some of the follow-up outcomes from that, if possible.
So Actua works in 200 Indigenous communities across the country. We engage about 35,000 Indigenous youth every year, and it's, when you're working and we work with urban Indigenous kids and in remote communities, the opportunities, and as we all know, the amount of economic development going on now and in the future, especially in northern communities, is massive. And we want to connect youth at a very young age to what that looks like. They know it's happening in their backyards. They have no idea. They see people coming in on planes and they see them in town, but Actua is playing a bridging role to actually allow them to have conversations, to get those people in and say, what are you doing? What are you working on? What was your path? And with technology, that opens up a whole other sphere of possibilities for these remote northern communities where they can actually stay in their communities. That's always a concern. So the kinds of impacts that we're looking for, one is absolutely on the confidence side. It starts with confidence first. So first exposure, increase their confidence, keep them engaged in school, but then very quickly building some of those early skills and using things like, coding and coding specifically, but that computational thinking that develops the kinds of skills that we know are going to build resilience among all youth and these Indigenous youth in the future. So doing really great computational thinking content allows them to build out those collaboration, creativity, problem solving, all those things that we've heard other people talk about needing. So those are the things that we're looking at. And the other point I wanted to make is just in the continuum of what could we do. I think it absolutely starts at K-12, but we can start to align the competencies that we're looking for in the K-12 system, building that out into post-secondary, and then into the workforce. So what are those competencies that we all know are important, and how do we back that out so that they're all connected? And that they're not, the transitions aren't as hard.
Okay, good.
I was going to add to that, and maybe to stealing Toby of Shopify's thunder, because I know he's here later today, but I've heard the story from him, and even think of some of the big tech celebrities out of the U.S., but they stumbled upon technology, right? And so it was something that they were just fortunate to have found and had a computer and created the next Facebook and the next Shopify. And so, do we want to leave the next innovation of our country and our world to chance, right? Do we want to just, leave it to a place that, hope that kids stumble upon a computer and they stumble upon the next kind of great thing? And I think that's why K-12 is so critical, and we do a lot of work in that space as well, because it's not even necessarily about skills, it's a way of thinking of problem solving. It's for planning for the jobs that don't even exist. It's for the next Shopify. It's for this innovation. And I think it's critical from an equity perspective that we work within K-12, we work within the school systems, because we want every kid in Canada to be able to find technology and it not to be something that someone of privilege is able to access. And so I think that's a really, really critical part to this whole piece, because you're right, 10 years goes by, in a flash. And so we need to be thinking now, and we need it to be, an equitable opportunity for everyone to participate in their next era of innovation.
Well, I think we also have to be decidedly inclusive. So I come from a family, I'm one generation from rural sub-Saharan Africa. My parents were born and raised in a village in rural Nigeria where their home consisted of thatch walls and thatch roof. And if it weren't for a progressive immigration policy and an inclusive, inviting environment, our family would never have had the opportunity to flee a land ravaged by civil war and come to this great country here in Canada. Immigration matters, to be sure. Growing homegrown talent matters as well, But if we have the entrepreneurial, or want the entrepreneurial attitude and collective ambition necessary to be a truly innovative society and to demonstrate the type of resilience and creativity that Canada is capable of, we need to pursue not only the best in our villages, in our cities, in our towns, we need to pursue the best that the world has to offer. And we have to emphatically demonstrate that this is an environment that includes the best that the world has to offer and gives succor to some of the most talented in the world. And so immigration does matter, and other cities and other jurisdictions are pursuing this with, whether even as I speak, New Zealand is pursuing its global impact visa portfolio, which aspires to attract some of the world's greatest entrepreneurs. Oslo has focused on immigration, integrated immigration policies to try and remove the barriers to foreign workers coming in to Norway and reduce that gap in time for certification from 6 to 8 months to an average of 8 days. So we're kidding ourselves if we think that access to talent globally isn't enabled through immigration. It really is, notwithstanding the need to have an effective and resilient education and training protocol here in Canada as well.
So just quickly, Toby, before I let you go, the engineers in your universe in that sector have done the right thing in terms of foreign credential recognition with lots of countries around the world. Some other industries haven't been so progressive in terms of foreign credential recognition with other nations. And so then we end up with another problem. When we do get the best and the brightest, are we giving them the tools they need to actually get to work in Canada? I think you're bang on.
Yeah, and I just want to follow up on Emme's comment is, we're competing with places around the world for talent. And, if we look at the University of Waterloo and the investments that have been happening in the Waterloo region, we've put $1.2 billion in investments across the ecosystem in just quantum technologies. But if you look at the UK, they just did, about 2 years ago, a $475 million investment in quantum technologies. The EU just did a $1 billion flagship across the EU in quantum technologies. We're competing with those kinds of investments to bring people to Canada. We need those immigration policies. We need that ecosystem. We need the right place here, and we have it. We just need to make it open and make it easy for people to get here.
So Toby, the kinds of things you're talking about, talk to us about end result jobs. So quantum computing, I can't do my thing on YouTube where I explain it, but what kind of jobs are created here? And what sort of ancillary benefits for the Canadian economy come from that? I'd be interested.
Well, how I like to position that is, imagine we're in 1947 and someone's showing you a vacuum tube and saying, this is going to change your world. And you're looking at them going, it's a glass vial with gas in it. Well, how is that going to change my life? That led to transistors, that led to computers, that led to all of us being here today with our phones in our pockets, in our cars, in our homes. We're on the cusp of that with quantum technologies. They will transform how we live. And so those are the kind of jobs, if we imagine how computing and ICT has changed the jobs that we've created in this country and around the world, that's the same thing that's going to happen, but on a transformational side. So everything across the economy will be affected.
So are you talking hardware? Potential hardware manufacturing?
Absolutely. We're going to need quantum chips. We're going to need quantum materials. We're going to need lots of things. It's not just software. It's hardware, software across the spectrum. We need programmers to be able to code and create quantum algorithms. It's a broad spectrum of jobs available.
Okay, thanks. All right, so we have 5 minutes. I'd really like to have the interactions in the crowd. Somebody is at the microphone. Nobina.
Hi, thank you. I'm Nobina Robinson with Polytechnics Canada. There's so much that is hopeful in this discussion, so I think I want to begin there. But if the discussion is a two-day discussion around policy, and what I heard from Minister Sohi yesterday down to now what I'm hearing, isn't there an opportunity here to leverage the discussion on innovation, which after all is a means to an end, to actually talk about a national skills strategy? And that's where I actually want to probe a little bit, or maybe put some sharpness on this. I don't think in all our discussions, so hopeful on inclusion and an inclusive innovation strategy, we're actually talking about the collaboration that we need between technicians, technologists, and scientists. We run the risk right now of having narrowcast our discussions on innovation to say STEM equals PhD. It does not. We need our tradespeople to know their good math and their science because our electrical smart grid workers need to know that too. And I would just challenge all of you to actually speak in more inclusive, collaborative ways. The narrow casting of the discussion only about coding, yes, we need coding. But I would then say we actually need demand-side data. How many coders do we really need? If we talk about the traditional industries, the staple industries, is it only coding or are there other skills? These signals are needed for the post-secondary system to actually start making change. Otherwise, we're going to continue to try to do stopgap measures. And to my mind, the global skills strategy, while very vital and very important, we want to make sure we also talk about a made-in-Canada talent strategy. So those are my comments. If I had a question, I guess it is, can't we use the moment around innovation to actually talk about a national skills strategy?
I think the answer to that your question is absolutely. You know, I think everyone on this stage would fully support and are supporting and doing a huge amount of work to make sure that that national skills agenda is inclusive and is answering a lot of the points that you've made. I think you definitely echo what we see across the country, and one of the messages that we convey to parents. So we engage hundreds of thousands of parents, and we hear all the time, the only path forward for my child is university. And I agree wholeheartedly with you that STEM does not equal innovation. Coding does not equal innovation. And I think we all talked about the fact that this is not done in isolation. There's context. There's a lot of why this matters and how it goes beyond just having those specific skills to being able to apply them more widely. So I agree with everything that you've said. I think that we certainly are talking a lot to parents about the fact that there is a big world and an important world beyond what happens in universities, and also giving kids the opportunity to play with some of those tools and to experience trades and to experience those technologies. So
I'd like to go to microphone 2 in the essence of time, so we can have lots of participation.
Thank you very much. I'm also a Waterloo graduate, and I'm delighted what is happening in Waterloo in terms of quantum mechanics and how you will detect cancer so easily and all that.
by swallowing diamond.
Beg your pardon? But let me tell you, I could predict that there will be more cancer way back, decades ago, when I knew that there is nuclear waste being thrown all over the world. We haven't still fixed Fukushima. It's still blowing nuclear waste to the world. We haven't still fixed all the toxic chemicals we are throwing around, which are also starting their own impact. Like, for example, what's happening in North Dakota, where oil is being piped under a nice, clean river. When are we going to deal with those kind of questions, which are so obvious to even a common man? He doesn't have to know quantum mechanics to understand that toxic chemicals are going to kill you, or nuclear waste is not good for your health.
You know what? I think
we are missing the big point.
That's exactly why we need to equip youth with experiences and skills so that they can be the ones to solve those big, important problems.
Back to mic 1.
Art Eggleton, the new and improved Senate of Canada.
Welcome, sir. Welcome.
I thank the panelists for all the good work they're doing and the help they're giving to a lot of young people in the research and the innovation. We're in the midst of a very vast change in the world of work. We have seen for a number of years now the globalization effects, the outsourcing, the automation. Demographics has been mentioned as one that we are also coping with. We see studies that suggest that even the knowledge jobs in future are at risk. A couple of studies, one in Canada, the United States, it's about 40% of them, because we're moving into an age of robotics and artificial intelligence and the impact that that's going to have on the world of work. So I'd like to get some of your comments on that. But I also would like to get your comments on the other people. There are millions of people in this country who have low-paying jobs. They work in the service industries, the hospitality industries, et cetera, et cetera. Not all of them are going to make it into this knowledge era, and yet they are part of the economy. They are part of what needs to be an inclusive society with greater equality. And they are undergoing an awful lot of threat at the moment. Precarious employment is a big threat. They get part-time jobs or short-term jobs, very little benefits, very little pensions. You know, this inequality is going to create great social cohesion problems in our country. So I'd like to get your comments on both of those aspects of the work world.
So it's a
Thank you.
great question, and indeed, Senator Eggleton, true statesman, former president of the Treasury Board, former Minister of National Defense, former Minister of International Trade, and truth be told, my former boss.
It's a plant.
Somebody once asked me, you know, how long have you worked for Art Eggleton? And I said, well, you know, I've been working for Art most of my adult life. I got paid for 4 years. So here we go again, still working. But thank you for the question. Just in terms of the vulnerability to automation, indeed, when I was doing my graduate work at Oxford, there were two researchers there, Carl Frey and Michael Osborne, who undertook an analysis. They actually produced an algorithm that assessed the vulnerability of contemporary jobs to automation. And indeed, the figure they came up with was 47% of the contemporary jobs in Western economies are at risk of automation. And they created an index. 0 was low risk, 1 was high risk. And many knowledge jobs, accounting, calculus, analytical jobs, many of those are vulnerable as well going forward. Now, the challenge is what replaces those jobs. And so we start speaking about things like technological unemployment. And the concept of technological unemployment is not unique to the fourth industrial revolution. It's actually a term that was used decades ago by John Maynard Keynes to describe how labor can be displaced through technological means. And I think the challenge now is for us to understand how to equip individuals who are at risk of being displaced and put in place, again, training and adjustment mechanisms that can help make the transition to the new economy positions. But folks also have to manage expectations in the short term. My company and other technology companies are actually commercializing some of these modalities and products and services that are facilitating greater, more rapid automation. And expectations have to be managed as to how quickly that transition can actually, and whether the transition to new technology jobs can keep up with the proliferation of digitization, advanced analytics, et cetera. Art, you also raised the notion of the vulnerable in our society and the risk of those folks falling through the cracks. That's where I think companies like my own have to have a social conscience, not just a pure pursuit of optimization and cost out innovation, but we also have to be connected in the communities where we live and work. So in our case, we're trying to partner. We rendered a decision years ago, for example, partially based on your advice actually, to invest in organizations like Pathways to Education, where we could actually reach out to youth in vulnerable regions of the country and bring them into our workspace, facilitate mentoring, and fund some of the basic literacy and social agility skills and engagement and belonging that entities like Pathways to Education undertake. If we have a collective focus on that by all technology firms in this country and elsewhere, that can help increase the resilience of young people in vulnerable parts of the country and also soften the pursuit of profit by technology firms like my own. But I can't agree with you more. It's important as we progress in this fourth industrial revolution to be cognizant of those who may be left behind if we're not mindful of bringing them along as well.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you, sir, for the question. So we have 2 questions left. What I propose is we take them in writing, and the panel will answer your questions on the Canada 2020 website going forward as a blog, if that's agreeable, because time is tight and we have to move along. That's an innovative way to answer questions at a forum, right?
So thank you very much to my panelists. Thank you to 2020 for the opportunity, and we look forward to working with all of you in the future.